Sleep-deprived fog. The words are right there. You can almost feel them. But getting them out takes this weird extra half second, like your brain is buffering on something it normally handles without thinking. That's the sleep version. It's not that you can't think, it's that everything costs slightly more than it should. You read the same line twice and still don't absorb it. You walk into the kitchen, stand there, and genuinely can't remember why you came in. Decisions that normally take 3 seconds suddenly feel like they need more thought than they deserve. What do you want for lunch? Which email to answer first? Small things start asking for energy you don't quite have. The strange part is how unaware of it you are while it's happening. You're not confused. You're functional. You're just operating at about 80%, and you usually only notice the missing 20 when you look back at what you did or said and think, yeah, that wasn't quite right. Information overload fog. This one doesn't announce itself. It just sort of accumulates. You've been reading, responding, processing. Not any single heavy thing, just a steady stream of input, and at some point your brain quietly starts resisting more of it. You open a tab and immediately forget what you were looking for. You reread a paragraph and nothing lands. Someone tells you something and 2 minutes later it's genuinely gone. It's not distraction exactly. It's more like the buffer is full and new things aren't sticking the way they normally would. The confusing part is how it mimics laziness. You feel like you should be able to focus, nothing is particularly hard, but there's this low-level resistance to taking anything else in. Scrolling becomes easier than reading. Watching becomes easier than thinking. Your brain isn't broken. It just hit a soft ceiling and started quietly redirecting you away from more input. Stress fog. Stress fog is different because your mind isn't empty. It's full. Overcrowded, actually. There's something sitting at the back of your head, some unresolved thing, running in the background whether you're actively thinking about it or not. You'll be in a conversation and realize you only caught half of it, not because you weren't trying, because part of your attention was already somewhere else. This is the version of fog that makes you forget where you put your keys, misread simple things, and respond to messages in a way that's technically correct but slightly off, missing the tone, missing the subtext. The more pressing the background worry, the more it borrows from whatever you're trying to do in the foreground. It's like trying to run a program while another one is quietly eating your RAM. You don't always see the second program, you just notice the first one running slower than it should. And the fog itself can become another thing to stress about. You notice you're not thinking clearly, and that gap between how sharp you usually are and how scattered you feel right now becomes its own source of friction. Low energy fog. This one sits in the body more than the head. It's the 3 p.m. version, or the end-of-week version, or the kind that shows up after you've been pushing through something for a while. Your brain technically works, it's just heavy. Sentences feel longer than they are. Tasks that require starting, anything that needs that first push to get moving, feel disproportionately hard. Not because they're complex, just because the energy to start them isn't quite there. So you defer. You do the easier thing. You stay in the already open tab instead of opening the one you actually need. There's a physical quality to this fog the others don't quite share. A dull pressure behind the eyes. A slowness in how quickly ideas connect. You're not blocked. You're just moving through something slightly thicker than usual. And it tends to be patient. It doesn't spike. It just sits there, making everything take a little longer than it should until you either rest or push through and quietly pay for it later. Blood sugar crash fog. This one has a timeline. It comes in after a meal or when it's been too long since one. And it's distinct enough that once you've noticed it a few times, you start to recognize the specific texture of it. Your thoughts go soft, not scattered, just imprecise. Forming a clear sentence in your head feels like reaching for something slightly out of range. Reading comprehension drops fast. You might look at a sentence and understand each word individually, but still not feel them connecting into meaning. That's the version most people recognize. There's also an emotional quality to it that the other fogs don't always have. A low-level irritability, a kind of flatness. Things that wouldn't normally bother you start to catch on something. It's not a mood exactly, it's more like the filter that usually processes things calmly has thinned out a little. The physical signs tend to come first if you're paying attention. A heaviness in the head, sometimes a slight shakiness, a weird mix of tired and restless at the same time. The mental fog usually follows a few minutes behind, once the physical shift has already started. Dehydration fog. This one is easy to miss because it doesn't feel like anything is wrong. You're not thirsty, or at least you don't register it as thirst. You're just slightly off, slightly slower. There's a dullness to your thinking that you can't quite locate. It often shows up as a concentration problem before anything else. Staying on one thing feels harder than usual. Your attention drifts not toward something more interesting, but toward nothing in particular. Just away. And there's usually a low, vague headache in the background. Not painful enough to demand attention, just present enough to make everything feel mildly heavier. The tell is how quickly it reverses. You drink something, and within 20 minutes the fog lifts, and you realize it had been there the whole time. You didn't notice the weight until it was gone. It's one of the more invisible ones. No obvious trigger, no clear emotional component, no timeline you can point to. Just a quiet, physical dimming that passes itself off as an ordinary slow day. Screen-induced fog. This one builds gradually and then arrives all at once. You've been looking at a screen, working, reading, scrolling, some combination, and at some point the quality of your attention quietly changes. You're still looking, you're just not quite taking anything in anymore. The eyes are part of it, a dry, slightly strained quality that starts to pull at your focus. But it's not just visual. There's a kind of mental saturation that sets in alongside it, like the input channel has been open too long and the signal is starting to degrade. Words take longer to process. You hover over something you've already read and feel no particular urge to absorb it. Switching between tasks gets harder, not easier. You'd think moving to something different would reset it, but usually it doesn't, because the medium is the same. Another screen, another stream of text or image or notification. The fog doesn't care what you're looking at. It just knows you've been looking too long. There's also a specific restlessness to it. You don't feel tired enough to stop, but you can't quite focus either. So you end up in this low productivity middle zone, still at the screen, still nominally working, but operating at a fraction of what you were an hour ago. Decision fatigue fog. By the time this one shows up, you've already made dozens of decisions you probably didn't count as decisions. What to wear, what to eat, what to reply, which task to start with, whether that email needs a response now or later. None of them were hard, but they all cost something. The fog that follows isn't about being tired in a physical sense. It's more specific than that. Big decisions start to feel impossible, not because they're actually more complex than they were this morning, but because the thing you use to weigh and decide has been quietly drawn down all day. So you defer. You go with the default. You pick whatever requires the least additional thought. Impulsiveness often shows up here, which isn't what most people expect. You'd think decision fatigue would make you more careful, more hesitant, but often it goes the other way. You stop weighing things properly and just go with whatever is in front of you. The filter that slows you down and makes you consider is the exact thing that's worn out. There's a flatness to it too. Options that would normally feel meaningfully different start to feel roughly equivalent. Not because they are, but because the part of your brain that processes those distinctions has already put in a full day. Emotional fog. This one doesn't come from too much input or too little sleep. It comes from something that happened, or something that's been sitting unresolved, and it takes up space in a way that's genuinely hard to account for. It's not sadness necessarily. It can follow almost any strong emotion. Grief, anger, anxiety, even excitement that didn't land the way you expected. The fog is what comes after the peak, when the feeling hasn't fully cleared but isn't sharp anymore either. Just present, taking up room. Concentration becomes unreliable. You can start a task, but staying in it requires more deliberate effort than usual. Your mind keeps drifting, not randomly, but back toward the thing. Even when you're not consciously thinking about it, there's a pull, a low, persistent gravity toward whatever is unresolved. This one doesn't respond well to effort. That's what separates it. The other fogs respond reasonably well to rest or food or a change of scene. Emotional fog is less cooperative. It tends to lift on its own timeline, not yours, and trying to outwork it usually just adds a layer of frustration on top of the original weight. Illness-related fog. Even before the obvious symptoms, something shifts. Your thinking gets quieter, not sharp in the wrong direction, just muted, like the volume on everything has been turned down slightly and you didn't notice when it happened. This is the version where reading feels fine, but retaining is harder, where conversations take more processing than normal, where your responses come a beat slower and you're not entirely sure why. Your body is already running some kind of background process, and cognition is apparently not the priority right now. There's a strange passivity to this fog. You're not restless, not distracted by anything specific. You just don't feel the usual pull toward activity or engagement. Things that would normally interest you just don't. You're present, but at a remove, slightly behind the glass. The fog and the physical symptoms tend to move together. As the body starts to recover, the fog thins. As the fog thins, you start to feel like yourself again, and often that mental return is how you first know you're genuinely getting better. Before the energy fully comes back, before the symptoms fully clear, the thinking sharpens, and somehow that feels like the most reliable sign of all.